Hello, welcome again to another session of this pedagogical channel. My name is David, and today, after a few sessions talking about the importance of developing skills in the curriculum, I just thought it might be interesting to spend a couple of minutes talking about different skills, and then start today with the research skills, and then move on and have other sessions later on about other skills which are crucial for the development of the students. And it would be great if you have a particular interest in how to develop certain skills in primary and secondary. Please write that in the chat, and I'll be very happy to upload sessions about any of them. So, talking about research skills, one definition would be the ability to find an answer to a question or a problem. This is what we want the students to do when developing these skills. Why have I decided to work on these ones? I think it's a personal preference, realizing that the majority of the secondary students, when they start doing research for any project in any subject, some of them struggle in terms of making um, a deep analysis of each one of the sources and trying to understand what is the best way to um, analyze those sources in terms of reliability, in terms of limitations, in terms of origin, purpose, and so on. And this is also crucial for the real life situations, since we live in a world where globalization makes information to be presented in very different ways. So, looking at the research skills, um, actually the research is much more than simply gathering information, and many secondary students consider that um, doing research is only based on going on Google um, and just copy and paste information without looking at the origin of the source, realizing how important that source could be, and thinking about different arguments and different perspectives. Research skills is the ability to make sense of the information that we found and to be able to find how relevant the information is. And this is the most complicated aspect of it, is to making sense of the information that we receive and to realize what is important from it and making sure that we use from the sources the appropriate information for the project we are doing. So if we look at the research process, what we have is a list of steps, and I've written in red the keywords, or the words that I think are essential for each one of the moments. So the first thing we need to do is to access the sources, and it's not only to find the sources, and it's not only the capacity to put whatever the source says into your own words, or then being able to reference it appropriately, but it's also to understand the information we are reading, the information we are getting from the source. This is very important. And if we don't understand that, disregard that source and move to another one. And once we have accessed the information and understood it, the next step will be to organize the information. Organize it in a way that makes sense to ourselves, that it has a purpose, a concrete meaning. And based on that, what we can do is work on our organizational skills and put the ideas together in forms of mind maps. For example, that could be one way, or infographics, just a way to connect the information. So we would invite the students to follow these steps once at a time, one at a time, sorry. And then after that, we're going to ask them to compare the sources that they've accessed and information that they've organized. And then try to think, do they need more sources? Do the sources that they have found have different perspectives, different points of view, different opinions, so they can compare and contrast the sources? So it's important for them to compare. Then after that, they will evaluate the sources. And when evaluating means grading, some kind of a grading sources. And I will try to share with you examples of how can we grade and evaluate sources. So looking at the range of sources, primary, secondary, videos, documentaries, newspapers, articles, magazines, textbooks, and then compare and contrast all these sources to decide which one are the ones that we're really going to use. Then analyzing the sources, it means breaking down information, looking for the essential information for each one of the sources, maybe even referencing or using quotation marks, some bits, some sentences, some expressions that are used in the sources. Then inferring, and that's probably the most important one, or the most important in terms of how complex it is. which is making deductions, and which is making sure that the sources we have different points of view, different interpretations, so we can at the end take part of it and decide which point of view is the one that fits into our way of thinking. And finally, concluding, which means what are the implications of what the sources say in terms of the problem that we're trying to solve. And I think this step-by-step process is something that we really need to focus on with our students in class, and spending time and giving time for them to hit each one of the points, really understanding what are they doing and in which way they're doing it. And they need to get used to this research process in a regular way, in a systematic way. So in every subject, in every project, they are used to follow those steps in terms of researching. Now, what we need to understand is that not all information is good information. So I'm going to try to share with you different ways to analyze the sources, evaluate the sources, for the students being able to discover which sources are good ones, which sources are reliable, and which sources can be used for a particular problem or a particular situation that we're analyzing. And this is probably one of the more important things, most important things for the students to develop in terms of skills, looking at their secondary education. There are lots of methods, and what I would like to do is to share some of them with you. All of them methods that I've used at some point with my students, my history students, and then all of them have positive aspects. Some of them have more complexities than others. One of the methods is this CRAB method, and CRABS stands for currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. So if you look at this method, it does follow in one way or the other the research method that we presented before. Yeah. So in terms of currency, what we're going to look at is the origin of the source. Sorry, it's looking at where does it come from, what's the name of the publisher, what's the name of the website, what is the book, what is the author, um, the information being updated, or is it an old version or some information. Yeah, what are the links that this information contains if it's an online process. Then we're going to look at the relevance, which basically is the importance of the source. Yeah, is this source really well related with our topic? Um, what's the audience of this source? It's been written for who? What's the intention of it? And we're going to look at the authority. So who's the author? Who's the sponsor? What's the source? If we look at the Cold War, for example, is it the same thing to look at an American source or a Soviet source? Or if you look at the Crusades in the Middle Ages, is it the same thing to look at a Christian source, at a Muslim source? Will they have different authors, and to what extent this author will affect on the consequence of what the source says? And we're going to look at the accuracy, how reliable the source is, the truthfulness, and the correctness, sorry, of the content. Um, is it biased? Is it subjective? Is it objective? And finally, the purpose. Yeah. So, what is the purpose of that source? Does the source wants to inform, teach, entertain only, persuade? Is it a propaganda aspect? And by the way, if you look at a propaganda source, it'll be very nice to look at Noam Chomsky analyzing of the propaganda intentions. It will really let us give us a big overview of the 10 different ways in which propaganda is brainwashing us. So that's one of the methods. Another one, it's a very interesting one, and the source of this one, it's hard to say. I found it in a classroom when leading a workshop. I was in a classroom, and I really liked this idea of looking at the real analysis of the source, and it's particularly for online sources. So real stands for read, examine, ask, and look, and it gives you the possibility to give points to each one of the answers. So read the URL, it is .edu, .org, .com, and depending on the reliability of that URL, you're going to give 1 point, or no points, or 0 points. You're going to examine the site's content, the vocabulary, the pictures, the images, citing sources, and you're going to give out of 3, depending on the content that the source gives you. And you're going to ask about the author, because we need to realize that anybody can publish on the internet. Look, I'm putting to YouTube these videos, and you might probably think that they're biased, they're subjective. So anybody can publish on the internet. So look at the author and give out of 2 points. And finally, look at the links that you can find, the advertising that you can find in that source, and give 2 points for these. Then you need to give a grade out of 8. If you're an MYP teacher, and this fits perfectly well into any of the criterion for your subject. And if you have below 4 points, means that you shouldn't use these source. So the interesting aspect of this source analysis is that gives you the chance to grade it, to evaluate it, and to reflect. And students tend to like these, even if it's a little bit more traditional than. Another one is the typical OPVL that everybody knows and is being used very often in all historical work. Is looking at the origin, the purpose, the value, and the limitations. And this is why, for example, the IB asks for a paper 1 history, being SL or being HL, is to look at the sources provided and ask the students to do an OPVL analysis. I don't have to explain exactly what does it mean each one of the points. Is quite obvious, isn't it? The origin, where does it come from? Yeah, who's the publisher? Who's the author? What are the author credentials? To what extent it's a reliable author? The purpose, so what's the intention of that source when it was written? What was the intention of the author? What's the author trying to convey? Yeah, is it clear, the purpose? And value and limitations means the positive and the negative aspects of the source, being a primary or a secondary source, and then who wrote it and to what extent. The value and limitations can analyze or can be based on origin and purpose. Let me explain that. So the origin can have values and can have limitations. The purpose can have values and have limitations. So the values and limitations is more a broad analysis of the source in all its aspects. Then we also have this other one, this DDAABB method, yeah, which stands for date, detail, author, audience, bias, and backup. So if you look at this one, is very similar to all the previous analysis because it talks about date in terms of a primary or secondary source. Is a source being written at the same time that the problem we're analyzing, or is being written later on? The detail, what is the source? Can you describe it? Yeah, is it primary? Is it secondary? Is it a newspaper? Is it a video? What's the intention? Yeah, the author, who's the author? The audience, what's the intention of the source? It's been written for who? And to do what? The bias, is the source objective? Is the source subjective? Is it one-sided? Yeah, and the backup is that can you use your previous knowledge to add to the source, and can you use your previous knowledge to analyze the source in depth? And finally, another one is this Weinberg source, yeah, which is based on sourcing, contextualizing, close reading, and corroboration. And it's, again, we're going back to the same aspects that are being analyzed. In terms of sourcing, is the origins, the date, when was it created, and what's the purpose of that source. The contextualizing is that can you try to find out if the source is linked or not to the development of that particular fact that we're analyzing. The close reading is looking at the keywords, the main aspect that the analysis is indicating. And finally, corroboration is the similarities and differences that this source has with other sources from the same time. So basically what's important to say is that there are many methods, and I've just indicated a few. Some of the methods that I've used, and some others I feel more confident and more comfortable than others. What's important is that we have our students understanding that research skills are based on the capacity they have to interpret, to understand, to analyze, and to synthesize the sources that they're finding. Moving away from a typical copy and paste and going more into a smart, in-depth analysis of each one of the sources, and making sure that the ones they are using are sources that are providing with valuable information for the problem they are trying to solve. It would be great if you have other systems and if you experienced other source analysis that you share that with us, so we can between all of us, try to share best practice in terms of the developing of research skills amongst our students. The last method that I want to propose is the OEIW method, and this one is just observe, explain, infer, and wonder. So there's a sheet in there that you can use, and the source it's on the sheet is not very clear what it says, but it's been developed by a teacher for classroom use, yeah, with effort. And then what's important is that it gives us one smart sheet that we can use with our students for them to fill in the different spaces. It will look at the exact same things. At the beginning, we'll look at the content and the context of the source in terms of author, in terms of intention regarding the audience, in terms of primary source or secondary, and in terms of description of that source. Yeah, and this is particularly used for historical sources. And finally, what it does is to give the chance students to realize about the observation, so the description, the meaning of the source, the message that the source presents, and finally, the questions that they can have to reflect on the source. The good thing of this method is the reflection process that comes at the end, that gives the chance to the students to reflect about their own thinking and their own understanding. Anyway, if you want to know which one to use, that would be my advice. The first thing is to ask the librarian. She or he is the best person to approach in terms of source analysis, and the advice given by them is extraordinary. You can also read the academic honesty and the academic integrity policy of your school. It should be clear in terms of uh, the consequences of academic misconduct and in terms of what it means to use sources appropriately. Um, Maybe offering many possibilities to your students and decide with them which one do they prefer to use, which one is better, which one they feel more comfortable with, and give them the chance to practice with different methods. Because at the end, all methods have a common approach. They all look alike. They all have the same intentions, and they all share the same principles. So again, thank you very much for your time. Um, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you find these sessions interesting. And if you want to have more sessions about skill development, please don't hesitate to write that down in the chat. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye.